So you and I, we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor Era Tapestry. In the early spring of 1485, a gentle light filtered through the stone arches. Eliza, 19 and radiant, paused in her chamber, her reflection caught in a polished bronze mirror. The scent of lavender and cold stone lingered, a soft counterpoint to the weight of her Yorkist blood. Daughter of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, whose beauty she carried in the golden cascade of her hair, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. The pale, almost translucent glow of her skin touched with a faint flush at her cheeks. Her eyes, a clear blue-gray that held quiet depth, mirroring the skies over Yorkshire. Her demeanor was a tapestry of poise and restraint. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying the cadence of a courtier's daughter, tempered by a warmth that endeared her to maids and guards alike. Yet beneath her complex exterior, Eliza's heart pulsed with a restless tide. Hope for peace, fear of what Richard III or the unseen Henry Tudor might demand, and a quiet grief for her family's fractured past. She smiled readily, her lips curving with a gentleness that masked her resolve. But her eyes betrayed moments of doubt, flickering when talk of marriage or battle reached her ears. In the chapel, she prayed for England's healing, her rosary beads a rhythm of endurance. Eliza, in her quiet exile, carried herself as a queen unborn, her beauty a beacon, her demeanor a shield. The eldest daughter of King Edward IV, she was a rose caught in the thorns of England's civil strife. The realm teetered on the edge of chaos as Richard III, her uncle, sat uneasily on the throne, his claim shadowed by whispers of her missing brothers, the princes in the Tower. Eliza's brother's disappearance was an unsolved mystery. They had been placed in the Tower of London by their uncle Richard for their safety. And then they had just vanished, never to be seen again. Some say it was Richard. Some say it was a frame job. Below, the castle courtyard bustled with servants and men-at-arms, their hurried steps betraying the tension that gripped the north. Eliza's fingers traced the edge of a small, worn prayer book, its pages soft from years of her mother's touch. Elizabeth, the Dowager Queen, had sent her daughter north for safety, but safety was a fleeting thing in a land where crowns were won with steel. The news from the south was grim. Henry Tudor, the Lancastrian exile, had landed with a ragtag army. His claim to the throne, bold but untested. Eliza's heart stirred with conflicting tides. Her Yorkist blood bound her to the house of her father, yet Richard's reign was dogged by suspicion and rebellion. In the weeks before Bosworth, Eliza's world shrank to whispers and waiting. Messengers brought tales of gathering armies, Henry's growing as he marched through Wales. She heard her uncle's fierce resolve. Eliza was no mere pawn, but a symbol herself, her hand in marriage a prize that could sway nobles to either side. Yet she was powerless to act, confined to prayers and the flickering of hope that her brothers, Edward and Richard, might yet live. Eliza's days were a quiet vigil, her moments watched by Richard's men. She had been branded illegitimate, and it stung like a wound. Yet rumors swirled that Richard, widowed since March of 1485, might wed her to secure his throne, a prospect that chilled her. Her uncle's dark gaze, once familial, now carried a possessiveness she recoiled from. After emerging from sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, where she and her family had sought refuge following her father's death and Richard's seizure of the throne, her status was ambiguous. A potential threat to Richard's reign due to her strong claim to the throne as Edward IV's heir, yet also a valuable asset for consolidating his rule. Eliza's daily life was shaped by the constraints of Richard's court, where she was treated with the deference due a highborn lady, but kept under close supervision to prevent her from becoming a rallying point for the Yorkist or Lancastrian rebels. Mornings began with prayers in a private chapel, She was attended by a small retinue of ladies-in-waiting, spies carefully chosen by Richard's administration to ensure loyalty. Her days were filled with activities befitting her rank: needlework, reading, devotional texts, and music, as the Yorkist court valued cultural refinement. Meals were taken in the great hall, or a private chamber surrounded by Richard's courtiers, where she would have been served rich dishes like roasted meat, spiced wine, and delicate pastries, though always under the scrutiny of those reporting to the king. Her interactions were tightly controlled. Correspondence with her mother Elizabeth or other relatives was monitored. As Richard sought to suppress any plotting that could leverage Eliza's claim to the throne, rumors swirled about Richard's intentions toward her. The atmosphere was one of quiet tension, far from London's political heart and isolating her from potential allies. She walked its cold stone corridors, gazing out over the Yorkshire moors, aware of the growing unrest in the realm. Whispers of Henry Tudor's planned invasion from France likely reached her, though she had little freedom to act on such knowledge. Her brothers, the princes in the Tower, were presumed dead by this point, leaving her as the surviving symbol of the Yorkist legitimacy. Eliza's thoughts often turned to her uncertain future. She spent hours in prayer or reflection, grappling with her precarious position as a pawn in a dynastic struggle, and the approaching battle of Bosworth Field. Her daily routine, structured, controlled, and outwardly serene, belied the undercurrent of fear and hope that defined her existence as Richard's grip on her power weakened, and Henry Tudor's forces gathered across the Channel. The alternative was Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile. He stirred a different unease. Eliza knew little of him, save his claim through his mother's line and his vow to marry her if he triumphed, a pledge that reached Eliza through smuggled letters from Yorkist allies. The idea of wedding a stranger, his red rose a rival to her white, sparked both curiosity and caution. Could such a marriage heal the wars that had bled her family, uniting York and Lancaster as her father's dream had faltered? Or would it bind her to a victor who saw her only as a prize, her Yorkist heart a trophy for his crown? She prayed in the castle's chapel, her rosary beads whispering for a king who would honor her, not merely claim her. Margaret Beaufort's name, tied to Henry Tudor, reached Eliza's ears. Margaret's ambition was to force Eliza to marry her son. Her ambition, a force Eliza respected, yet feared, knowing the Tudor matriarch's son might reshape her fate. Her cousin Maggie, a child under Clarence's tainted legacy, was a distant figure, her Yorkist blood a faint echo of Eliza's own, too young to share this burden. The court of Richard III buzzed with preparations for battle, while Eliza waited, isolated. As August 1485 drew near, Eliza's thoughts turned to Bosworth, where steel would decide her path. She pictured her father's golden reign, now a memory, and her brother's laughter, now silent, her resolve hardening to survive for them. Marrying the victor, whether Henry's hope or Richard's shadow, was a duty she would bear. On the eve of the battle, as August heat gave way to restless dusk, Eliza stood alone. She wondered if the morrow would bring glory or only more graves. The clash at Bosworth Field, she knew, would decide not just the fate of kings, but her own, whether she would be a queen to heal a fractured realm or a footnote in its ruins. The dawn of August 22, 1485 broke over Bosworth Field with a damp chill, shrouded in mist, and the restless stir of men preparing for slaughter. The clash of steel and the cries of the wounded would soon drown out the morning's quiet. But for now, the armies of Richard III and Henry Tudor eyed each other warily, their banners limp in the humid air. At the heart of this uneasy tableau stood the Stanley brothers, Lord Thomas Stanley and Sir William Stanley, whose forces, numbering perhaps 6,000, held the balance of power. Their allegiance, or lack thereof, would carve the day's outcome into history. Lord Thomas, ever the cautious opportunist, had positioned his men on a low rise, separate from both armies, his banners fluttering ambiguously. His brother, Sir William, commanded a smaller contingent nearby, their red and gold livery catching the first weak rays of sunlight. Both had sworn fealty to King Richard, yet their ties to Henry Tudor ran deep. Thomas was married to Margaret Beaufort, Henry's mother, and William harbored no love for the Yorkist king. Richard, wary of their duplicity, held Thomas's son, Lord Strange, hostage to ensure loyalty. But the Stanleys were masters of the double game, their true intent veiled as they surveyed the field. Henry Tudor's army, some 5,000 strong, was a patchwork of Welsh levies, French mercenaries, and exiled Lancastrians. Outnumbered by Richard's 10,000, Henry, untested in battle, relied on his stepfather's promises and his 6,000 additional men. Richard opened the fight with a fierce artillery barrage, his vanguard crashing into Henry's lines. The Stanleys, however, held back. Thomas's letters to Henry had hinted at support, but as steel met steel, the Stanley brothers remained still, a maddening riddle to both sides. As the morning wore on, the tide teetered. Richard's forces pressed hard, but Henry's men held their ground with grim resolve. Then a pivotal moment. Richard, spotting Henry's standard near the rear, led a daring charge to cut down the Tudor himself. The king's knights thundered forward, Richard's crowned helm glinting. Henry's guard braced, outnumbered, their pikes trembling. It was then that Sir William Stanley, reading the battle's pulse, made his choice. With a shout, he spurred his cavalry, some 2,500 men, down the slope, not to Richard's aid, but against him, stopping him from reaching Henry. The red and gold wave smashed into Richard's flanks, shattering his charge, and Lord Thomas's forces, slower to act, soon followed, their numbers tipping the scales. Richard fought on, unhorsed, his armor battered, crying defiance even as the Stanleys' men closed in. Treason, he roared, they say, before a halberd ended his reign. By noon the field was Henry's, strewn with the dead, perhaps 1,000, including Richard himself, his body broken and stripped. As the dust settled over Bosworth field, Lord Thomas Stanley stood among the victors, his decision to turn his forces against the king proving a decisive blow for Henry Tudor's triumph. Yet even as cheers rose for the newly crowned Henry VII, Stanley's thoughts were shadowed by the fate of his eldest son, George, Lord Strange, held captive by Richard III as a guarantor of his father's loyalty. The young man, barely 25, had been seized weeks earlier when Richard, wary of Stanley's wavering allegiance, demanded a hostage to secure his support. Now with Richard dead and the battlefield strewn with Yorkist banners, the question of Lord Strange's survival hung heavy. Amid the carnage, legend tells of a crown, Richard's circlet, found tangled in a hawthorn bush by a soldier, perhaps one of Stanley's men. In a moment, heavy with symbol, one of the Stanley brothers plucked it free and placed it on Henry's head as the army cheered. The Tudor, now King Henry VII, stood crowned on the bloody field, the hawthorn's thorns a fitting emblem for a victory won through betrayal. The Stanleys' gamble had paid off, their late charge sealing Richard's doom and birthing a new dynasty. Thomas would be made Earl of Derby, William showered with honors, though his ambition later cost him his head. For now, as Henry knelt under the weight of that battered crown, the Stanleys stood as kingmakers. In the chaotic hours after the battle, as Henry's men rounded up the prisoners and looted the fallen, Stanley dispatched a trusted captain to where Lord Strange had been held under guard. Word soon returned, carried by a grim-faced rider. Strange lived, spared by the hesitation of Richard's guards, or perhaps by divine providence. During the battle's final moments, as Richard's line crumbled and the standards fell, the captors had fled, leaving Strange confined, but unharmed, in a locked chamber. Stanley, his stern face betraying a flicker of relief, rode to retrieve his son. When father and son reunited, Strange's gaunt frame and haunted eyes spoke of weeks of fear, uncertain whether each day might bring execution should his father betray Richard. At a makeshift council, Strange's release was heralded as a sign of divine favor for the Tudor victory, his life preserved to serve as a symbol of loyalty rewarded. Stanley, pragmatic as ever, brought his son to kneel before Henry, pledging fealty with a gratitude that masked a calculated nature in his 11th hour defection. Strange, shaken but resolute, took his place among the new king's court, his ordeal a quiet reminder of the precarious dance of power that had crowned a new dynasty. Margaret Beaufort stood in a modest pavilion near Bosworth Field. At 42, her diminutive figure belied the iron will that had carried her through the decades of civil war. Her dark eyes, sharp with resolve, fixed on the horizon where her son, Henry Tudor, had just been crowned on the battlefield, a battered circlet now resting on his head. The news of Richard III's defeat and death delivered by a mud-streaked messenger. Her son was now King Henry VII, and she felt the hand of Providence in the victory. Margaret's mind, ever strategic, turned immediately to the fragile new reign. Her marriage to Lord Thomas Stanley, whose forces had swung the battle by abandoning Richard at the critical hour, had been her masterstroke, binding her to the kingmaker, whose men had ensured Henry's survival. As she stepped from the tent, the distant cheers of Henry's army echoed. In the days that followed, as Henry's retinue marched toward London, Margaret rode at his side, her counsel sharp and constant. At a council meeting, Henry made a bold and calculated decision to backdate his reign to August 21st, the day before the battle. This decree branded Richard's supporters as traitors, their lands and titles forfeit, a move to warn wavering nobles and swell the royal coffers. The act erased Richard's final day as king, rewriting history to assert Henry's divine right from the moment he stepped onto English soil. She had taught him this ruthlessness, tempered by piety in their years of coded letters and whispered plans. From her temporary lodgings in Nottingham, Margaret orchestrated the first steps of Henry's rule. Her scribes penned letters to hesitant lords, promising mercy to those who swore fealty, while her spies sifted rumors of rebellion. She pressed for Henry's marriage to Eliza, a union she had long envisioned to bind the warring houses. Yet one obstacle loomed over Margaret's vision of a united England, the shadow of Eliza's illegitimacy, a stain cast by Richard III's claim that her father Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth was invalid. Margaret, ever meticulous, knew this could not stand. The marriage was to be the keystone of Henry's reign, merging Lancaster and York into a new Tudor rose, and no whisper of illegitimacy could taint it. In a candlelit chamber, as Henry's entourage rested after Bosworth, Margaret convened a small council of trusted advisers, clerks versed in canon law, and loyal nobles with influences in Parliament. Her voice, steady and commanding, outlined a twofold plan. First, she urged the immediate repeal of the act declaring illegitimacy. The act must be struck from record, its copies burned, and its claims of Edward IV's bigamy erased as if they had never existed. This would restore Eliza's legitimacy in the eyes of the law and the church, silencing Yorkist dissenters who might exploit the old decree to challenge the marriage. Second, Margaret proposed a papal dispensation to bless the union, addressing any lingering doubts about consanguinity between Henry and Eliza, who shared distant royal blood. She dispatched a trusted emissary to Rome, with a chest of gold from her personal coffers to secure the Pope's swift approval. Margaret's foresight extended beyond loyalties. She understood the court of public opinion must also be swayed. To this end, she instructed her agents to spread word of Eliza's virtue and royal lineage, emphasizing her as the true daughter of Edward IV, whose beauty and grace would complement Henry's martial prowess. In private, Margaret met with Elizabeth, whose pride in her daughter's restoration matched Margaret's ambition. The two women, once rivals, forged a wary alliance, agreeing that Eliza's public appearances, clad in Yorkist white and gold, would rally the people to the new dynasty. Margaret's plan was precise. By the time Henry and Eliza wed, no trace of illegitimacy would remain, and the Tudor crown would rest on an unassailable union. The autumn chill seeped through the stone walls of the abbey, where Elizabeth, Dowager Queen of England, resided in her quiet seclusion, her once dazzling beauty softened by grief and time. Richard III, her brother-in-law, lay dead, and Henry Tudor, now Henry VII, had claimed the throne. Elizabeth, at 48, stood, her fingers tracing the edge of a velvet curtain, her thoughts tangled with hopes and loss. Her daughter Eliza was the key to uniting the houses. The fate of her sons, the princes in the Tower, haunted her still, their absence a wound that would not heal. In the days following the battle, word came of Henry's bold decree to backdate his reign. Elizabeth, seasoned in the games of power, recognized the cunning of it. Yet it also stirred an unease in her heart. Her Yorkist kin, loyal to her late husband Edward IV, now faced ruin, unless they bent to Henry's will. Her own position as mother to the Yorkist heiress hung in a delicate balance. From her seclusion, Elizabeth moved cautiously, her influence diminished but not extinguished. Elizabeth pressed for assurances, her daughter's place as queen, her own dower lands restored, and perhaps, though unspoken, some truth about her sons. The fall of the usurper who had imprisoned her sons brought a fleeting surge of vindication, but it could not pierce the deeper wound that gnawed at her heart. The fate of her boys, Edward and Richard, vanished from the Tower's stone walls these past 2 years. As a mother, she clung to the faint possibility that her boys had escaped, perhaps hidden by loyalists or smuggled abroad by some unknown hand. She had written coded letters to contacts in Flanders, seeking word of the two young princes, but no reply had come. Dead or alive, her sons were pawns in a game now won by Henry Tudor, his claim to the throne bolstered by her daughter Eliza's hand. Demanded a unified narrative, one that might require the final erasure of her son's claim to silence Yorkist rebels. The thought chilled her, yet she could not deny the necessity of her daughter's marriage to Henry, a union that would heal the bleeding realm and secure her surviving children's future. She learned of Henry's coronation through a letter from her loyal maid, its words painting Westminster's Abbey's soaring arches, the heavy crown of St. Edward gleaming on Henry's brow, the choir's hymns rising like incense. She did not stand in the side gallery as some might have imagined, but in her mind's eye she saw the scene. Nobles pledging fealty. Many once sworn to her husband, now bowing to a Tudor king. Her thoughts drifted to her daughter, Eliza, 19 and radiant, soon to wed Henry. In Henry's triumph, she glimpsed a path forward. Her daughter's marriage to seal the Tudor throne was her legacy's thread, a fragile piece woven from the wars that had torn her family. She thought of Margaret, Henry's mother, whose ambition had crowned her son, a woman Elizabeth respected, but had never trusted, their paths crossing only in shared dreams of stability. Elizabeth, her eyes still sharp with resolve, vowed to endure. London's distant bells ringing for Henry's coronation stirred her heart. The distant sound of Westminster's bells rang out as Maggie, a girl of 12, sat, her small hands clutching a worn embroidery hoop. Her father had been the disgraced and executed older brother of her uncle, King Richard. Now Maggie was a Yorkist princess in a world reshaped by Tudor victory. Henry VII's coronation loomed, and the castle, once a refuge, now felt like a gilded cage. The news of Bosworth Field had reached her weeks earlier, Uncle Richard's death and her own future cast in the shadow. Her brother, Edward, Earl of Warwick, aged 10, was confined elsewhere, a potential rival to the new king's throne. Maggie kept busy with quiet lessons and guarded whispers from her attendants. As a Plantagenet, her royal blood was both a treasure and a threat. She heard that her cousin Eliza, summoned for her marriage to Henry, planned to unite the warring houses. But Maggie's world was confined to prayers and the flicker of hearthlight. As November gave way to December, Maggie remained far from the coronation splendor. She imagined the scene, Henry crowned in Westminster, while her cousin Eliza prepared for a wedding that would seal the Tudor claim. Letters from her Aunt Elizabeth arrived sparingly, urging patience and obedience. Maggie understood the unspoken truth. She was a pawn, her royal blood a bargaining chip to be watched, not wielded. In the weeks leading to the wedding, Maggie's routine grew stricter. She embroidered a small rose, white and delicate, a quiet act of defiance for the House of York. Whispers reached her of Henry's court, where Margaret, the king's mother, orchestrated every detail, ensuring Eliza's role as queen consort would heal the realm. By January, as London prepared for the royal wedding, Maggie's thoughts turned inward. She knelt in the castle's chapel, her prayers mingling the scent of wax and old stone, asking for her brother's safety and her own uncertain future. Eliza's marriage would bring peace, they said, but for Maggie it marked the beginning of a life lived on the edge of a throne that she could never claim, her destiny tied to a crown now firmly Tudor. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.